Hello, and welcome to Raising the Bar with the MBBA. I'm Adeola Adejobi.
And I'm Jason Clark, president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. The MBBA is the largest association of predominantly African-American attorneys in New York. The goal of Raising the Bar with the MBBA is to identify justice issues affecting our communities while also trying to identify some solutions as well.
Today on Raising the Bar, we are going to talk about student loan debt. Our guests are Nicole Arrindell and Nicole Perry, both with the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Nicole and Nicole.
And Nicole.
So I'm going to ask this question as if I don't already know the answer, but how bad is the student loan debt crisis?
Wow, how bad. I know I personally have student loans, and we're talking about something that has been characterized as a $1.5 trillion issue. And it impacts over 40 million Americans. So when we start talking about how bad it is, I think we have to face those numbers and wrap our heads around it. Debt is already a stressor, I think, generally for most people, whether that be credit cards, mortgages, et cetera. But so many people are impacted by student loans because that student loan is what ensures many people access to higher education.
Right.
At a New York City level, which we've looked at, there are 1 million New York City adults that have student loans, and the average balance among those that have student loans is about $35,000. It impacts a number of different people, and it's an issue that we should be looking at because what we saw is that it does impact different groups more adversely than others.
I was going to say there was an article that actually came out talking about how it's prohibiting millennials and zennials, if you will, from purchasing homes and doing other things that they want to do in their life because they just don't have enough money to be able to do it because of all the debt that they have.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You see people having lifestyle changes, people making decisions not to purchase a home, people making decisions not to get married, people making decisions about certain jobs that they're willing to take because they have such an enormous amount of debt to pay back. I think that it has impacted, lifestyle, which is huge.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we're really concerned about is the financial health of New Yorkers. So if you have student loan debt that's taken up a significant amount of your income every month, then you're thinking about the things that you're not able to do. So you're not able to save. You're not able to get a down payment for a home. You're weighing different bills to pay each month. So it does put a strain on families, and there's mental stress that goes along with that.
Because the main thing is, I just remember growing up, everyone told you is, invest in your education.
Right.
Do whatever you can to make sure you get an education, and it'll pay dividends. And I certainly think it has, but maybe not as much, in the bank account area when you're having to pay your loans, every month in these just huge amounts of it. So I know that especially in New York, this has been an issue, but is this something that's still also an issue nationally as well?
Absolutely. I think you raise a really good point about the characterization of student loan debt. People have always said it's the good debt that you should have because it is an investment in yourself. But the reality is that that good debt is good money that needs to be paid back, right?
Right.
It also points to the fact that people characterize financial aid as free money. Well, we know financial aid isn't always free. Now, there might be a part of that financial assistance package that includes a grant or a scholarship that you don't have to pay back, but it most certainly usually includes loans that definitely have to be paid back. So I think we have to get around how we're characterizing student loan debt and really changing the narrative on that.
And I would add there's some underlying assumptions to that student loan debt is good debt. One assumption is that people complete their degrees. So non-completion is a huge factor in terms of someone being in distress related to their student loan debt or being in delinquency or default. So if you don't complete your degree but you took out loans, then you have the debt without the degree, and so you're not able to realize the earnings that's supposed to come with a degree. And so that's a challenge.
Right.
Yeah, and I think even coupled with that, another issue is that, the assumption that you'll be making exponentially more to where, you can afford the monthly payments. Whereas, stats have shown that over time, people have not necessarily been making as much more. So it's if someone's taking on, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 worth of debt annually to go to school, and then they come out with a job making $60,000, then it actually probably didn't make sense.
And I'd imagine, especially when we're talking about the financial crisis, like a lot of folks who are, at the young professional stage now, if they were caught up in the financial crisis at the time, where a lot of people thought, yes, I'd put all this money or I invested all this money in my education and now I'm no longer in school, but maybe I don't have the job that I thought I was going to have, it just kind of stunts everything that comes back. So especially given that both of you are at the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, what are some of the things that are being done on the city level to try to help folks like Adeola and me and everyone I know?
And even ourselves.
Yes.
Nicole, do you want to talk about some of the research we've done in this space?
So we've done a few things. We have conducted several research studies to understand, especially at a New York City level, who is impacted by student loan debt. And we did see some trends by neighborhood, and that's one of the reasons we've been really focused on this issue, because we saw that households or individuals with student loan debt in lower income neighborhoods were more adversely impacted. So where we saw borrowers who were delinquent or in default with their student loans, the rate was 8% in higher income neighborhoods, but 20% in lower income neighborhoods. So a very significant divide. And we saw a lot of challenges in the Bronx and in Brooklyn around student loan debt. In addition to the research, we've also conducted listening tours and went out to different communities to talk to them and hear what challenges they're facing related to student loan debt. We also conducted a public hearing last year to hear from practitioners and also people that have student loan debt. And some of the things that we were hearing is that people are very confused. There's a lot of misinformation or a lack of reliable information about student loan debt and what options are in terms of payment plans or repayment plans, and also around loan forgiveness programs. And so what we've been trying to do is take steps to talk to people about their debt. So we have what we've called the student loan debt clinics, where we've taken our one-on-one financial counseling and coaching model and sat down with student loan borrowers to help them understand what debt do they have opportunities or options to reduce their monthly payments for their debt, is there an option to discharge that debt. So that's been one of the things we've really been focusing on, and how do we get reliable information out to borrowers. We're looking forward to launching a public awareness campaign later this month to try to help people understand the implications of student loan debt and what they can do before they take on that debt.
And besides the work of our research, we also provide financial counseling at centers throughout the city. So that's another opportunity for any New Yorker to get free financial counseling to understand their debt that they have, whether it's student loans or other debt, but also even try to make a plan for what you want to do. If you want to seek higher education, you can actually meet with them and they can formulate a plan for you to really figure out how to finance that. And outside of that, we are an enforcement agency. So we get to enforce the New York City Consumer Protection Law, which prohibits deceptive practices by businesses operating in New York City. So another way that DCA has been trying to make some impact in this space is to investigate student loan scams, which are rampant. Anytime you have some sort of financial crisis, I think we saw that with the mortgage crisis and the financial market fallout, that there were so many scams that were created to help people get out of their foreclosures, for instance. We're seeing the same thing in the student loan space, and so we're investigating those things. We're also looking at schools and colleges that offer 2-year and 4-year degrees that might not be regulated by the state. We're looking at ways that we can regulate those entities. We're looking at ways that we can bring lawsuits against deceptive schools and colleges when it comes to admissions and their discussions with students about financial aid. So we're looking at it from a multifaceted perspectives.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so going back to some of the solutions, how do people find you? It's like you're looking for them, but some of them are also looking for you.
So I mentioned the public awareness campaign that we'll be launching later this month. There's also our website, nyc.gov/student loans, that has a repository of information around student loan debt, and also a link to our financial empowerment centers.
And 311 is a number that
311.
you see
Who knew?
everywhere.
Who
So
knew?
particularly, I think if you see something deceptive, if you've experienced a student loan scam, if you're seeking that financial counseling we even discussed, you can call 311 and you can be directed to assistance that way.
So you mentioned that there are student loan scams. So for folks who are just listening, I know that's something that my ears peaked up when you had mentioned that. What are some common scams regarding student loans that people should be mindful of?
Sure. I think some of the common scams are very similar to what we see when people are seeking to settle or reduce their debt. Many companies will make claims that they can reduce your student loans if you pay them monthly fees instead of paying your student loan servicer the monthly fees, and the student loan servicer being the company that sends you the bill and demands payment every month. We've seen scams that involve even law firms or companies that claim to be law firms that will offer consumers an opportunity to negotiate their student loans on their behalf, but they're really paying a company a lot of money when they should be paying their student loans. It shows up in so many different ways. My thing is that if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. But someone's got to pay these loans, so I could see how people can be very easily deceived. I mean, a lot of times I know when it comes to different types of deceptive practices and fraud, there's usually some type of distracting hook, and this way it certainly seems like it would be money. But another thing that you had mentioned as well was the idea of, non-regulated colleges.
Right.
So what would be some of the things there as well?
Right. So I think people use terms such as for-profit colleges or proprietary schools, those entities that offer 2-year and 4-year degrees but might not be regulated by the state education department. So there are some institutions like that exist. And so we're looking at, as an agency, are there ways we can implement rules, which are laws that are promulgated and issued by a city agency, to try to ensure that those schools are not being deceptive when it comes to admissions and information that's provided to consumers.
Can you talk about why the city of New York actually has a special interest in this? Because I think that most people would be shocked to hear that, a city agency is getting involved in making sure that people are protected when it comes to student loans.
I think it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about today. The financial health implications for New Yorkers, or just thinking about, what does it mean to carry that amount of debt and not be able to make those payments? The stress, the financial stress that are put on families and households. Also, an inability to save, an inability to grow assets and build savings. Going back to the research, there's also a social justice, racial justice issue to this when you see the discrepancies among different communities and among folks of different races and ethnicities. And so, as a city, we're asking ourselves the question of, why are certain groups more adversely impacted? And, what does it mean for the financial health of New Yorkers, and what can we do? And so DCA has taken these steps and collaborated with others in the city to address this issue, because it's a very important one.
And also, our mission speaks to that, right? DCA is the oldest municipal consumer protection agency in the United States. So I think it's very much ingrained in our agency's mission to find ways that we can protect consumers, to find ways that we can ensure economic justice every day for New Yorkers. So that's part of our interest.
So it is interesting as we talk about some of these issues, and I know one thing that I think, or I'll be right in saying this, that Nicole said earlier, I believe it's Nicole Arrindell, but about this idea of misperceptions when it comes to student loans. So what are some common ones when you're going on these listening tours, or when you're talking to folks, that people tend to think about their loans that may not be correct?
Well, Nicole brought up a point, Nicole Arrindell brought up a point earlier, just starting with the financial aid package and the award letter that you get from schools, understanding that some of those are grants and some of those are loans. And so there's that misperception that they don't have to repay some of those. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done on the front end, and thinking about ideas of how these award letters can be more transparent for students. Just in terms of misperceptions around repayment options, for federal student loans, there are income-driven repayment plans. Some people under those income-driven repayment plans could have monthly payments of $0 per month. And unfortunately, not everyone is aware of those types of repayment plans and are not taking advantage of them.
Yeah, and there's also people who might be listening that may have a temporary or permanent disability, and there's ways that they can seek to get their student loans discharged because of that permanent or temporary disability. So again, it's a matter of talking to people who understand the ways out of this situation and calling 311, speaking to a financial counselor. Those are some of the steps that we think New Yorkers can take right now that can help them to get out of this crisis.
I guess another thing to look at as well is, so let's say I am about to go to college or graduate school or what have you, and I'm listening to this and I say, all right, I'm going to protect myself. What are some things that people should be doing before they actually get into the loans that could be helpful in protecting, or at least reducing the debt that they may have once they're done with school?
I mean, the first thing, depending on where you are in the process, but just doing the research to make sure. We talked about some of the for-profit schools and the use of deceptive practices, comparing the schools that you're looking at, understanding what type of jobs do their graduates get? What is the graduation rate? How long does it normally take to complete a degree? When graduates finish their degree, how much debt do they normally have? So kind of getting that information and comparing the different schools. Also looking for opportunities outside of student loan debt to pay for school, still researching scholarship programs. But I think it's important to do the due diligence on the front end, and also talking with a financial counselor, really understanding how much you can afford to pay each month in student loan debt once you take it on, and so planning accordingly.
And I would ask, in terms of when you all have like the clinics or when people are coming out, like, do you sense that people kind of need to build some trust before they start to talk? Because I feel like that's a big part of, like, maybe people can't pay and they feel ashamed that they can't, or they don't know someone and they don't really want to talk about their financial background. Like, how do you all establish that so that people can have an open dialogue with your department?
Yeah, I mean, that's something, trust is important when people are talking about their finances, so that's a really great point. Our financial counselors, even broadly for financial counseling, building that trust with clients is really important. And it's really understanding where they're coming from, and showing that you're able to provide them guidance and support. Like, everyone has their own financial goals and can articulate what challenges they have. So just kind of meeting them where they are and being a good listener is one step. But it's just really important to help people just understand what their current situation is. What we found with the student loan debt clinics, I mean, this is something that people want to get help with. We were able to meet with over 100 clients at 3 of the clinics that we did, but we had over 300 clients on the wait list. So this is an area that people want to talk with someone, and they want to get help and make sure they're on the right path.
And Nicole, you're right. You mentioned that this is an issue that we're going out into the community to address, right? Our financial counseling is available at community-based organizations throughout the city. So as far as building trust, people know those organizations that are in their neighborhoods. So it's not really the government that they're meeting with to discuss this, which I think sometimes can be where people don't feel trust with that government. But these are community-based organizations where they can get that counseling one-on-one and confidential. And then we also have had these student loan debt clinics, particularly in public libraries and spaces like that where, again, I think institutions in the neighborhoods that people trust is another place to start from when you're trying to build that type of trust with the counselors and the consumers.
Yeah, and is there like a certain level of like confidentiality that people know that they have that kind of helps them get comfortable as well?
For our one-on-one financial counseling and coaching, it is strictly confidential. So yeah, we're very clear and upfront with that.
I
right away.
figured that, but I think it was good for people to know that, you know.
Yes.
All right, great. So let's say, hello, I'm Jason. I am at your legal clinic. I am way behind on my, and I know everyone's situation, you know, there are a lot of nuances, but let's say I'm coming to this clinic and I am way behind on my, let's say I'm 3 months behind, or, you know, let's say I am 6 months behind on my, my debt. Like, what are certain things that people usually hear or what they can start doing if someone like that is coming to one of those clinics?
So there's information. I mean, we can look at, is this an opportunity for you to, if you have federal student loans, is this an opportunity to consolidate your student loans to get more affordable payments? Should you be on an income-driven repayment plan? There's an opportunity for the financial counselor to sit with you to talk to your loan servicer to see what options that you have to get on a better path in terms of repaying your student loans. And also, of course, looking at your budget and your financial situation to see what is an affordable payment for you.
And also, if you are so far gone, so 6 months isn't so far gone. There are people who are years behind, and there's still ways to get out of default. And that comes with talking to people who understand the rules and regulations, particularly around federal student loans. So talking to, if Jason, with the 6 months behind, goes and talks to one of the counselors, and now it's 6 years of debt that you forgot to mention, you still have an opportunity to figure out a way out of that. And I think that's what needs to be said to New Yorkers, that there is a way to figure out ways to get out of default, whether that be consolidating those loans to figure out a smaller payment that you can make, or if you've been sued. Quite frankly, the financial counselors aren't attorneys, but they can point you to free legal services many times where you can speak to an attorney and figure out how do you address the student loan lawsuit. Because again, if you're that far in arrears or that far without having made any payments, you could be sued. And even with that, there are ways to have some protections, and you should talk to someone. So I want New Yorkers to understand that even when you feel so overwhelmed by this, speaking to someone who's a professional, particularly a free assistance in this space, is the first step to take.
And is bankruptcy ever an option?
So bankruptcy is one of those things people are like, oh yeah, well I could just file bankruptcy and get out of debt. Well, a lot of consumer debt could be discharged in bankruptcy. Student loans can be discharged in bankruptcy, but it's a very, very high, strict standard that you would have to meet to show that you are qualifying for that. And so again, that's going to be something that you would have to speak to an attorney about and talk about your particular situation. So it's not something that's very available for most consumers.
Got it. Yeah. So we talked about what the state is now when it comes to student loan debt. What are some legislative solutions that may be out there, maybe being looked at, that may be able to assist? Because I remember, for example, during the presidential elections, one of the things people are always talking about is the fact that there are so many people who have student loans, from schools. Can you discuss a little bit about, what are some ideas out there that people may want to keep in mind?
Sure. We've mentioned a lot about talking about the student loan servicers. Those are the companies that actually collect your payments every month on your student loan bills, the ones who send you the bills. And so there's been nationally many states and even municipalities that have been considering regulating those student loan servicers. Right now at the federal level, there's been a lot of changes with this current administration when it comes to policies and regulations that protect borrowers of student loans and students generally. So I think in light of that, many municipalities and states have stepped up to try to figure out ways that they can implement state or municipal regulations to really try to attack some of the problematic student loan servicers, for instance. So that's one thing I've seen nationally, and there's been legislation that's passed in many states and municipalities in that vein.
So let's take it from the top of the student loan process, if you will. Like someone gets into an amazing school like NYU, Spelman, Stanford, and their family just can't afford, they don't have enough money to be able to pay out of pocket, right? So they apply, they get this package, and there's student loans that are included. Where exactly are those loans coming from? Because it seems like families like fill out the paperwork, but they're not exactly sure where that money is coming from.
I think that's a really good question. People don't know where they're getting this money from, and I think I can say that a lot of people tend to think that this is free money. So I'm glad you mentioned that there are often loans and grants and scholarships that are a part of that package that you might get that's considered financial aid. The money can, when it comes to student loans, the money can come from the federal government, which is the U.S. Department of Education, who provides those loans to students. And also the money can come from private lenders, so such as banks often are lenders of student loans as well. So there are federal and private student loan sources.
And I would add that we normally recommend that if you can, to focus on the federal student loans, because the private loans don't come with as many protections and options around repayment. So we mentioned that with the federal student loans, there are a number of income-driven repayment plan options that are available. There's the options around deferment and forbearance, and opportunities around consolidation and also rehabilitation when you're having trouble with your student loans. So where at all possible, it's not always the case for everyone. I think looking at the federal student loan options that come in your financial aid award letter is a first step before turning to private loans. And we do have tip sheets on our website. I think I mentioned nyc.gov/student loans. There is information around the different types of loans, and before you go to school, and when you're considering a school, and also when you already have loans, what are some of the things that you need to know, and what are some of the steps that you can take?
Okay.
And I know that there are probably a lot of folks who come to the office or reach out to you. What would you say are maybe like 2 or 3 of the primary misconceptions people have about student loans?
I think in terms of misconceptions, it's just around, really doing the math around what repayment looks like after school, and understanding too things around just like interest accruing while you may be in a grace period. So for many students, you're not repaying your student loans while you're in school. And then most of the time you have like a 6-month or so grace period after you graduate before your student loan repayments start. For some loan types, during that grace period, your loans are still accruing interest. And so a lot of people aren't aware of that. Also, when you're looking at repayment options, if you're not applying for an income-driven repayment plan, some people may think, let's just push out, like extend the repayment time period for as long as possible to get your monthly payments lower. People should know that that also costs them more in the long run. And so just understanding like what the different trade-offs are and the implications as you're thinking about your student loans.
And so that's all the time we have. Obviously, we need a part 2 because there's so much here. But we want to thank our guests for being here today.
My name is Jason Clark.
And I'm Adeola Adejobi.
I want to thank you for watching Raising the Bar on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Goodbye.